Buenos días a todas y a todos. Bienvenidos a esta tercera jornada del seminario doctoral La modernización y gobernanza del proyecto europeo en un marco plural con valores y objetivos compartidos, que organizamos desde este marco de la Fundación Academia Europea de Juste, en el marco del programa del Premio Europeo Carlos V y las becas de investigación y movilidad europeas, que llevan el nombre del premiado en 2017, don Marcelino OREJA. Comenzamos esta última jornada con la investigadora Nicoletta Thoma, de la Universidad de Leicester, que es de Chipre, pero viene de Londres y ha hecho un largo viaje para acompañarnos y hablarnos de un tema pues especialmente delicado, como son las minorías y cómo promover los derechos humanos y la coexistencia pacífica en los grupos minoritarios, especialmente las necesidades culturales de los niños pertenecientes a esas minorías en Chipre. Y para ello, y acompañarla en su presentación, tengo el honor de presentar también a Bettina Steibel. Bettina Steibel es doctora en Derecho por la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, se licenció en Derecho por la Universidad de Montpellier en 2008, donde cursó también un máster en Derecho Público y posteriormente realizó el máster en Derecho y Políticas de la Unión Europea, un programa bilingüe de 2 años con movilidad en 4 universidades, como la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, la Universitat degli Studi di Milano, la Université Szczeciński en Polonia, la Université Montpellier en Francia, y en el marco de su doctorado realizó además estancias de investigación en la Universidad de Berkeley, en Estados Unidos, y en la Universidad de París II, Panthéon-Assas, en Francia, y ha sido beneficiaria, y esto es lo que además nos honra decir, de una beca del Premio Europeo Carlos V a Sofía Corradi, una antigua investigadora actualmente alumni de Juste, además de una beca predoctoral de 4 años en la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. Actualmente trabaja en EIPA Barcelona para el proyecto Euromed Justice y es profesora asociada de la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. Sus áreas de investigación son el derecho de la Unión Europea, el derecho internacional, los derechos fundamentales y el derecho constitucional. Y además tenemos que felicitarla porque hace 2 días recibió el premio Jaume Brunet, que tiene como objetivo promover los derechos humanos. Un tema que además va muy en línea con la presentación que hará posteriormente nuestra investigadora. Bettina, para nosotros es un honor tenerte aquí por esa especial vinculación que tienes con la Fundación, habiendo sido investigadora anteriormente de Juste. Estás ahora en el otro lado de la mesa, por decirlo de alguna manera, y esperamos que nuestra colaboración en el futuro, y estoy seguro de ello, va a ser rica. De momento empezamos de esta manera y la audiencia es toda tuya. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
You have the floor. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, en primer lugar me gustaría agradecer a la Fundación, a todo el personal de la Fundación por haberme invitado aquí hoy. Es un placer para mí estar aquí, es un poco especial justamente por los motivos que ha mencionado Miguel, porque estuve aquí hace 2 años y estaba de doctorado, básicamente. Y puedo asegurar que esta experiencia fue muy provechosa para mí respecto a la defensa de la tesis. Así que espero que sea una experiencia muy provechosa para todos los doctorandos aquí estos días.
My PhD, so I hope it will be as fruitful for you as it was for me. And now
we will have a presentation by Nicoletta Thoma on defending human rights and promoting peaceful coexistence by addressing the cultural needs of minority groups, a case study of the cultural needs of children from minorities in Cyprus. So we can see that this is a topic that is very important because it is at the crossroads of at least 2 critical issues in Europe. On the one hand, we have the recognition of children's rights, whether they are actually recognized, how are they implemented, and on the other hand, we also have cultural rights. And this is very important in Europe today because we're living in a globalized society. And I'm sure that even though the Cyprus context is very special because traditionally we have different minorities, this case study will be very useful also for other European countries because we are living in an increasingly multicultural society. So I know that you're still in the research process, but I'm sure that the results of your research will be very useful for all of the European countries, all of the EU countries. So I look very much forward to hearing your first findings and also to read your final recommendations on the subject.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Bettina, for what you have said about my research. And I hope that I will meet the expectations. I will try to speak slowly and not so fast, just to help the interpreters to do their job well. First of all, I would like to say that it is my pleasure to be part of this excellent community, research community, and research network, to be here to present my study, to exchange ideas with you and get feedback, because I think this is the most important aspect for an academic's life and a researcher's life. Before starting my presentation, I would like to mention that on Wednesday, 2 days ago, the first day of this doctoral seminar, I've heard, after Don Marcelino's speech, a comment about the new generation. Where is the new generation in this EU process for modernization and integration? And if I'm not mistaken, and if I may remember correct, and I'm so glad to hear this comment, because these 2 days we have been discussing the EU regulations, laws, legislations, policies, and in directives, but we have not been discussing about the new generation. Where are the children, the youth, the young people in this process? So in my presentation today, I will try to include this element, to include the element of young people and how young people can be involved and be engaged in the EU modernization integration, and to make it more in a better way, in a smoothly way, let's say, and to give their opinion, their perceptions, their understandings and their views, so as to be part of the European Union. Because so far, I think they don't feel so part of the European Union. So I will not make my introduction long, because the time flies. And I will proceed to my presentation and to the proposed research. So as you can see on the slide, the title of my proposed research is Defending Human Rights and Promoting Peaceful Coexistence by Addressing the Cultural Needs of Minority Groups, a case study of the cultural needs of minority children in Cyprus. So if we focus on this title, someone will question two things. Okay, why did you choose cultural needs or rights? Why did you choose children from minorities? And why did you choose Cyprus? Because you are Cypriot? No, I don't think this is the answer. And there is a purpose behind that. So I will try to answer in the first part of my presentation these questions. So why children? Why children from minorities? And their cultural rights? And why Cyprus? First of all, answering this question, why children, it's important to mention that a lot of authors, commentators, academics, researchers have mentioned that the opinions, the understandings, the perceptions and the views of children are important in academia. It can bring it to the next step, to the next level. But in this slide, I listed three commentators, three academics. On the one hand, we have Tistel, who in 2012 pointed out that children's voices and views have only symbolic value in the society. So the message from this commentator is that we don't care a lot about children, about young people. We have their views and voices, but they recognize them just as symbolic. We don't take into account their views. We are here just to listen to them, but we don't take them into account to make progress on and to take into consideration their opinions and views to change things. On the other hand, Potter, in 2008, mentioned that this area of children's voices and children's views remains problematic, especially, for example, whether children are aware or not of their rights. Do they know their rights? And if yes or if not, what do they think about their rights? So that's really important in general and specifically on their cultural rights, which is going to be the discussion of today's presentation. And lastly, Freeman in 2012 argued that by asking children about their understandings, their perceptions, their opinions, and any obstacles they perceive in exercising their rights, this can be an important step. The important is behind my picture, but that's fine, in determining an agenda for advocacy and to better fulfill their rights. In 2013, UNICEF, another supranational institution, maintained that the true measure of a nation's standing is how well that tends to children, their sense of being included in the societies into which they are born and live in. I think the European Union takes into consideration the CRC, the Children's Rights Convention, and all the supranational international institutions, conventions and agreements on the children's rights. It takes into account the UNICEF statements and quotations, but I think the European Union needs to come up with its own quotations, let's say. I hope in my next presentation in a couple of years, instead of having UNICEF's quote, to have European Union quote on a slide. And then the second question is why Cyprus then? As I mentioned, it's not because I'm Cypriot. It influenced my selection to select Cyprus as the case study, but the reasons are different, let's say. And I'm going to be discussing those reasons in the next couple of slides. So Cyprus is a really complex context, to say it in a broader way. There are lots of minority groups that coexist with the majority group. I'm not sure whether you're aware where is Cyprus on the map. In the next slide, I included the map of Cyprus, but I didn't include it in the whole region. But Cyprus is located in the Western Asia, south of Turkey, west of Syria and Lebanon, north of Egypt, and southeast of Greece. So it has a really important geostrategic position, and it was colonized by every ruling empire that controlled the region in the previous centuries. This colonization has contributed towards, if I go back to the previous slides, to this multicultural, multilinguistic, and multi-religious characteristic of Cyprus, of the country. Until today, Greek Cypriots constitute the majority of the island, along with Turkish Cypriots, Maronites, Armenians, Latin, Jewish, and Roman Gypsies. And all these communities, or minorities groups, let's say, try to coexist with the majority group, with the Greek Cypriots. So, as we have observed, Cyprus is a really complex context with a long history, with a long political and cultural background. And let me explain a bit about these linguistic and cultural characteristics. So the first colonization was organized by the ancient Greeks during the Bronze Age. And it was during that period that the then inhabitants connected with the Greek language, religion, and culture. The Armenian population on the island dates back to the Byzantine period, when Armenian governors served the Byzantium in Cyprus. In medieval times, the first Maronites arrived on the island as a result of the Arab attacks between Syria and Lebanon on that time, back to the 7th century. The Latin population and Jewish population has started documenting presence since 1126, when Franks bought Cyprus and Venetian privileged merchants settled on the island. Their population also increased during the island's Venetian period. The Roma population, on the other hand, arrived on the island in the 14th century, whereas the island's present-day Turkish Cypriot population began to develop after the Ottoman Empire and the colonization of the island in 1571. And the Ottoman period lasted until the 1878, when the Ottoman Empire sold Cyprus to the Great Britain. Great Britain has mostly impacted the modern historical and political background of the island. It led to the foundation of an independent state. If we go to the next slide, is the third point, that the British colonization impacted the modern historical and political background of the island. It has led to the foundation of an independent state and played a crucial role in the formation of Antilles' present-day constitution and legal system. I'm not going to talk a lot about the relationship between the Great Britain and Cyprus, because in 1955 we had an armed struggle against the Britain in Cyprus between 1955 and 1959. The important thing on that is that during this armed struggle, the Turkish Cypriots preferred the island's partition, not to do the armed struggle. On the other hand, the Armenians, the Maronites, the Latins, and Jewish identified with the Greek Cypriots, whereas the Roma population is not referred at all in the historical documents. So we have no reference on the Roma population. By the end of the 1950s, the British administration decided to grant independence and encourage the negotiations to draft the constitution for an independent country. Apart from that, the history is long. I'm not going to talk a lot about it. The only thing that I want to mention is after the independence, the competition between Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots overhung. The interference of the foreign powers, Great Britain, Greece, and Turkey, further contributed to make this situation even more difficult. And then, on 1963, there were some intercommunal troubles between the two communities, the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. In 1964, the United Nations peacekeepers arrived to patrol the Green Line. Although the political climate positively changed a bit until 1968, the intercommunal talks were held at that period, the situation remained tense. Turkish Cypriots expressed some concerns for their safety. And on the 1974, we had the Greek military junta in Greece to remove the then president from power. And at that point, Turkey found the excuse to arrive to the island, to invade to the island, to save the Turkish Cypriots due to the conflicts and due to the concerns they were expressing for their safety. So in 1974, the island of Cyprus was divided, and the country nowadays is 1/3 controlled by Turkey and 2/3 by the Republic of Cyprus. It's important to mention on these slides that to go a bit back, in 1963, or in 1964, where Turkish Cypriots expressed their concerns for their safety, they decided at the same time to withdraw from the government. So until that point, until 1964, the government was constituted by Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. So by withdrawing from the government, the state and the constitution will collapse. So to safeguard the existence of the state and to safeguard the constitution so as to find solutions where it was necessary, the then judges of the Constitutional Court decided to establish the doctrine of necessity. It's important to mention that we have the doctrine of necessity because until today it has an impact on the fulfillment of the rights of children, especially coming from the Turkish Cypriot community. So that's why I wanted to mention a bit about the historical and political background of the island, because it does have an impact on the today's situation of the fulfillment of the rights of children. Coming to the present, coming today, and the statement of the problem, why, apart from this historical and political background, why to select Cyprus as the case study, it was mentioned by the Human Rights Council in 2018, last year, that the cultural rights of minority groups seem to be violated in Cyprus. So the Cyprus human mechanism seemed to remain practically ineffective. From the European Union perspective, we have not something similar, and that's my purpose, that in the next presentation, I hope that I will have a feedback from the European Union too, and not only from the Human Rights Council, from the United Nations, and from many other institutions, supranational institutions, about the cultural rights and cultural needs of the minority groups in Cyprus, and especially for the minority children. And the last reason that I have collected Cyprus to be the case study of the research is that we have lots of research from an educational perspective, from a sociological or psychological perspective, but we don't have from a children's rights legal perspective. And that's important, as I mentioned in my comments the previous days, it's important to have to compare data from different perspectives, if we have same results, similar results, or different results. So the purpose of the research is to investigate the effectiveness of existing domestic laws and policies that have ratified the European Union context on the cultural needs and rights of minority children, to explore the awareness and the perceptions of those children in relation to their cultural needs, and as a result and the outcome of this research, to suggest possible reforms to relevant domestic laws and policies to ultimately defend human rights, promote peaceful coexistence between minority and majority groups, not only in Cyprus, but in other, as Bettina said, in other European member states and in other non-European member states at the same time, that where a similar situation may exist. So briefly, I'm going to go through the research questions, which are part of the research aim. It's just whether Cyprus domestic law is effective, which factors may limit the cultural needs and rights of the minority children. Are minority children aware of their rights? And if yes, or if no, how do they perceive these rights? And what reforms can be suggested, both at the domestic level, as I mentioned here, but as the ultimate outcome, any suggestions on the European Union level and any supranational level. So the importance and significance of this research is to enrich the knowledge and academic dialogue on children's rights, on cultural rights, and peaceful coexistence within the European research community. And on the other hand, the significance is to improve children's rights mechanisms and strengthen the government structures at the national level and supranational level, as I said, not only in Cyprus, but also in other European and non-European regions in which similar challenges may exist. So the impact of this research is to recommend reforms on the Cyprus domestic laws and policies, and at the European level as well, promote the respect of all children of their cultural minority background, and help at the same time children themselves develop self-respect and be agents of their rights. By being agents, they can change and they can bring European Union and any other supranational institutions to the next step. So being a researcher, I do really believe in the methodology that we use and the tools we use to conduct research. So methodologically speaking, the design of my research is not just from a legal doctrinal perspective, as most of our lawyers do, but it has a multidisciplinary approach. On the one hand, I employ a phenomenological approach. On the other hand, a sociolegal methodology, and by mentioning sociolegal, I mean the interaction between law and society, so about awareness, about perception, about any limitation on the fulfillment of cultural rights, and definitely having a legal background to employ a doctrinal methodology to analyze the law as it is written in the books, in the statutes, and in the case law. As I said, I'm going to do an empirical research, and it's important by doing an empirical research to have participants, either a quantitative research or a qualitative research. So the participants of this research, as I mentioned here, will be 20 to 25 children from minority groups in Cyprus. But having discussed last night that it needs to be submitted within 3 months, starting from today, I don't think that I will be able to collect and analyze data from 20 to 25 interviews, so most probably I will have to reduce this number or to change the methodology from interviewing children to have focus groups. So to have the same amount of children, but to have focus groups instead of interviewing them. Apart from children, children rights stakeholders, such as human rights lawyers, Commissioner for Children's Rights, Commissioner for Human Rights, MPs, community representative of Armenians, Maronites, Latis, and NGOs representatives will be interviewed. And definitely, I'm going to have archival data as EU law, articles of the Constitution, domestic law texts, as well as legal and social policies. And these will be analyzed through a qualitative analysis that is behind of my picture. It is important to mention that I'm going to select 20 to 25 children or less children, but according to the Cyprus District Administration, we have 600, until 2018, we have 653 children from the communities. And as you can see, we have the Armenians, the Turkish Cypriots, Maronites, and Latins. We don't have the number of Jewish children, as I mentioned yesterday, because they're recognized as religious groups, as all actually these community groups are not recognized as separate community groups, but as religious groups belonging to the majority group, to the Greek Cypriots, apart from the Turkish Cypriots, which are the main community alongside the Greek Cypriots. And the other important thing here is that Roma children have not been recorded yet in the Cyprus District Administration. The reason I need to go to their community and find whether they know that they have this right. And I think this right is linked to the cultural rights. It's not just to have the right to be a citizen, but to be a citizen, it is really well linked to your cultural background and to your cultural rights. Definitely, having participants in my research, I will need to consider the ethics behind it. So any ethical approval, the participants will be informed, they need to be informed in writing and verbally. I will need to request from the participants to sign a declaration of acceptance. Their names will be replaced by other names. And for children, this acceptance will be signed by their parents. And the parents will be asked to talk with their children prior to the interview or to the focus group and without my presence there, and they will inform me about the child's decision afterwards. And if they're not willing to participate in the research, they have an absolute right about it. So transparency will be a hallmark throughout the first stage of this process until the end of this research. So in order to defend, because I have only 20 minutes, in order to defend then the human rights of children, definitely we need to come with a theoretical framework. And the theoretical framework needs to be here, to be analyzed, just to give us an answer do children from minorities have rights? If they don't have rights, we cannot defend their rights. So I will explain the following theories in brief, which I will base my research upon, in order to come to a conclusion that, yes, children from minorities have rights, and these children can have their rights, their cultural rights, be defended. On the one hand, we have the world choice theory. According to the world choice theory, children have no rights. They lack this ability, this capacity to make choices, and as a result, to claim their rights or waive their rights, or just have their rights in existence without enforcing them. The children, the only thing they can have is to be represented by their parents, by the state, by the European Union, as their next friend. So someone else, as I said, their parents or the state, the local authorities, or a supranational institution, UNICEF, United Nations, European Union, can enforce children's rights on behalf of children. But do all these national institutions, the parents, understand the true wishes of the child? And that's where we can criticize the world theory. Parents, the state, Cyprus, or local authorities, European Union, in my opinion, does not know exact what the true wishes of these minority children are. So that theory lacks sensitivity and it is incomplete. So, as I said, we don't know what is the true wish, what is the true understanding and the true perception of the children of their rights. On the other hand, we have the interest-benefit theory. And this is the theoretical framework where the CRC derives its origins, like the interest of the child, the best interest of the child. And this theory recognizes that children have rights. They have rights by having needs and by having interests. So by saying that, it means that children from minorities have cultural rights because they have cultural needs and have cultural interests. So it seems that this theory is most contextual and explanatory, and seems to be more appropriate to defend the human rights of minority children. So as I said, by analyzing the interest theory, we can confirm that children from minorities have cultural rights. And the authorities, the officials, the European Union, must ensure that they have their cultural rights fulfilled, and they must give them the floor to express their views, their understandings, their opinions about how to better fulfill, or best fulfill these rights. I'm not going to, because I don't have much time, I'm not going to talk about the criticism of the interest theory, but I want to correlate it with another theory, the cultural relativism. Cultural relativism is a doctrine, is a set actually of doctrines that respect cultural differences. So on the one hand, children have rights, but are these rights universal? Are children, minority children in Cyprus, do actually minority children in Cyprus recognize in the same way and do the same cultural rights as minority children who live in Spain, or who live in France, or who live in Italy? They may have the same rights, but when we interpret, or when they may express their views, they may express their views in a different way. And here we have the cultural relativism to add a value on that. So as Donnelly explained in 2006 and 2013, the codification of rights only in legalistic terms, to have a document at the European Union level to be the same for all the European member states. Does this resolve the inclusion of children's voices and the different voices among children from different cultural backgrounds? So that's a question. European Union actually wants unity through diversity. And I think this is the most important theoretical background, to have this diversity. not to take into account that we have all these, we have universal values and we have universal rights, but at the same time, these rights can be challenged by having the cultural context, by having the historical and political background in each different context within the European Union. I don't have the time to present in this table the research questions, the theory, the methodology, etc. But I'm going straight forward to defend the human rights of children from minorities. So having established that children from minorities have rights, they have cultural rights because they have interests and they have needs, we can now defend the human rights of children. Some commentators and authors believe that, okay, they have interests, they have needs, but rights framework is not the best to come with solutions, to come up with solutions. And they propose alternative frameworks. This is not the best place to propose these alternative frameworks or discuss these alternative frameworks. But I'm going to say that defending the human rights of children for their cultural rights can have a positive impact in their own lives. These rights can draw attention to the governments, to the local governments, to the national governments, to the supranational governments, to any agencies, to the parents of the children, and to the children themselves to realize and to have respect and self-respect. So on the one hand, to have self-respect, and on the other hand, to have respect among them. And thus we can fulfill the unity through diversity. So rights are linked to the notion of agency, respect, and dignity. And so we can achieve the peaceful coexistence between different communities. And the last part is some preliminary results. So at the European Union level, so far, I've not done the whole research so far, but having read and explored a couple of legislations, laws, policies, etc. I found that traditionally we find this knowledge or this terminology or these arguments at either an international level or a national level, so the constitutional level. On the other hand, the European provisions are a bit vague and unclear and uncertain, if I'm not mistaken. If we take into account Article 2, I'm not sure, it's not seen behind my picture, of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which reads that the European Union shall respect cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. And after that, what? This can give the discretion to the state, to the local authorities, to the parents to treat the cultural rights in their own benefit and not to the benefit or to the interest of the children themselves, or give no opportunity to children to treat and decide upon their interests, upon their needs, and upon their rights. At the national level, concerning the Cyprus constitution, as previously mentioned, the constitution is a bit discriminatory and only bicommunal. So it only recognizes Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots as the main communities, but the Armenians, the Maronites, the Latin, Jewish, Roma people are not recognized, to be honest. But the previous mentioned ones are as recognized only as religious groups that belong to either the Greek Cypriot community or the Turkish Cypriot community. In the 1960 Constitution, they were given the opportunity, these four minority groups, to decide, do you want to belong to the Greek Cypriot community or to the Turkish Cypriot community? They were not given the opportunity to be communities, minority communities by themselves. And this has an impact until today to the new generation. And to the new generation of Cyprus, but most probably to the new generation of other states that may have similar contexts and similar situations. Cyprus law ratifying the EU law, I have listed some of the national law. I'm not going to refer to all of them, but I want to mention that there is no direct reference to the minority children and to their culture, needs and rights. And again, from a European level to the national level, we can observe that there is a discretion, and discretion is given to the state by the national law and to the parents to decide upon the cultural needs of their children. And it does not give the opportunity of the children to decide for themselves. As I mentioned, the doctrine of necessity makes the situation even more complicated, and the parents' cultural rights seem to prevail over the children's rights. The notion that protecting rights of adults, it means that at the same time it protects the rights of the children. So we don't have a distinction between children's rights and adults' rights. So we have a combination between, or a link between adults' rights and children's rights. And the last part is that so far I've done a pilot phase with 2 interviews with children among minority groups. And it's really important if we read the statement by a person. This is not the real name of the child, the 16-year-old child, but having an interview and discussion with him about the cultural rights in Cyprus, he mentioned, I don't know how much about my costumes, about our costumes, but I would like to learn more about them or exercise them, especially in my schools. So the interview protocol or the focus group protocol will be divided into different contexts: the school context, the home context, and the social context, probably at the park, at a club, a community club, etc., and to see how these children, if they know their rights, if they know that they have cultural rights, and if they know about them. The person here mentioned that, I don't know that I have costumes, and I don't know what costumes I have in my community. And then how do they perceive, understand these rights within different contexts, the school context, the social context, and the home context, and what do they want actually to change on that? Not only to give recommendations on the national level, but then to give recommendations on a supranational level. That table was drafted before having the discussion, yesterday's discussion, about that we need to submit within these 3 months. So I said, okay, if I have to analyze, to contact interviews, and then analyze the interviews, and to have stakeholders, and to have 20 to 25 children, then I will need more time. And so I had like a table, proposed table, but that proposed table seemed to have the completion of the whole research by October 2020. So that's impossible. So I don't think we need to take into account this proposed table, but to take into account that I will implement and I will draft the results of my research within these 3 months, and I will adjust it to the needs of the foundation. And I think that's it, and we have 7 more minutes for more questions then, if you want to clarify something more or to analyze something more. So I'm here for any questions.
Thank you very much. It was a very it was a very interesting presentation. So I think that this is actually a research where we can see that the multi-level approach is very relevant, because there are international norms on children's rights and cultural rights. And then we have to see what is the regulation at the European, state, and also local levels. So probably one of the challenges is to have a coherent approach whereby all of the levels actually complement each other. So I think that this is something that could be taken into account, especially if we think about the fact that when we refer to the European Union legal framework, we also have to take into account the division of competences. So depending on the respective competencies of each level, we have to see what is the best regulation of those rights and how the different levels can contribute to the objective of ensuring those rights. Then I have a few questions. I don't know if we should if we should do a round of questions and then you answer all of the questions, or if we should ask questions and you directly respond to the questions.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
So question and then to answer the question and then to the next question.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think that the multidisciplinary approach is a very important aspect, especially lawyers normally don't do that, and I know it because I'm also a lawyer. So I think that this is a very positive aspect. But then regarding the legal framework, maybe I think that there are some questions regarding especially the European legal framework. So when you're mentioning the European legal framework, are you referring to the EU or to the Council of Europe framework, or both? Probably you should refer to both.
Yeah.
I will continue this set of questions, and especially since you're talking about the European framework as a reference, maybe we should have more information about what the reference is. What is the regulation at the European level of those rights, and do you intend to take into account the case law of the European courts? European Court of Human Rights and the Court of Justice of the EU, and also what you're mentioning cultural rights. Which one? What are the cultural rights that you're analyzing? Those are elements that I was thinking about, and also maybe you could refer to the case law of both courts regarding the best interests of the child, because I know that there is case law on this, so maybe it could be of interest. And then from more practical point of view, so you're saying that the state doesn't take into account the cultural rights of minority children, and from a practical point of view, what are the consequences? How do you see that those rights are not taken into account, and how can they actually be taken into account? Because I assume that since you have an empirical perspective, this is something that is especially important for you. So what does it mean in practice from a practical point of view? So for now, that's it, and then we can have more questions.
Okay, shall I answer first to these questions, and then we can open the floor to the audience? So definitely, I need to have a combination between Council of Europe and European Union. I will attempt to do that. I hope that within this 3-month period, I will be able to make a combination between the European Union and the Council of Europe, as your feedback was about. The second question is about cultural rights, and what do I mean with cultural rights? Because cultural rights are a huge element, a huge field actually. So I will take the cultural rights from anthropological perspective. And having said anthropological perspective is in the sense that it is all the characteristics that makes a society to think. It is a way to live and to communicate between the citizens, to communicate between each other. So there is the cultural rights, we can take them into account from a legal perspective, from different perspectives. But in this proposed research, because we need to promote the peaceful coexistence, and in order to promote the peaceful coexistence, we need dialogue. So to have this dialogue, I think the anthropological aspect of cultural rights needs to be taken into account as a way that people in the society think, they live, and they communicate each other to find a peaceful way to coexist, and not to the one community or to the one group of individuals, because it's not only the community level, but it's the groups of individuals like adults and children, find a best solution, not to have the rights of a group, the rights of a community to overhang the rights of another community or the rights of another group of individuals. So if I answer your question, I'm going to take it from an anthropological perspective.
And regarding...
Yeah, and the implementation. So what I want actually to do, I'm going to be, on the one hand, theory-driven, and on the other hand, data-driven. So I'm going to ask these children, and I will be open to hear any, I'm not going to be biased with the results in the practical level. So I want to be open to their own suggestions, and this is the purpose of the research, to give the floor to the children to express themselves. It's not just to manipulate them in a way to find the best answer and the best practice at the practical level, at the national or the supranational level, but to give the floor to the children themselves, to mention what is best for them at the practical level, to enjoy their culture. And that's it. It's not just to enjoy rights in the sense, what is right? Even adults cannot answer this question, what is right? It's an open-ended question without a specific answer. But it's just to make them enjoy an exercise what is given to them by their background, and not to forget their background. Because this is what happened actually in Cyprus nowadays. We have this assimilation of the groups. So we talked yesterday about Jewish, and in Cyprus we have Jewish, but we don't know where they are. And probably the new generations will not speak the language, will not know the history, will not know the culture. Religiously speaking, they may be converted to the majority group's religion. So I think that's important to make them, on the one hand, understand that they have this opportunity to express themselves, and on the other hand, to be data-driven, to express themselves from theory, from the theoretical perspective, but to be data-driven, to collect all these views and all these opinions on how to make things better.
Okay, well, yes. But I assume that you want to propose recommendations then to maybe better regulate the recognition of those rights for children. So this is why I was asking from a practical level, but taking into account then the policies that could be implemented to ensure ensure respect for those rights.
Definitely, this process cannot be done only by me. So we need actually to have all the local actors involved in this process, and to be informed about the results, and then to find synergies and cooperations on how, at the national, supranational level, we can propose these suggestions and these recommendations. In my opinion, we can even change the constitution if we want, or we can even change what is written on the paper if we have these social actors on our side.
Okay, so thank you very much. We're going to open the floor to questions. Do we have some questions?
So first of all, thanks a lot, Nicoletta, for your very nice and interesting presentation. I think the research project of your PhD is indeed needed and very, very ambitious and interesting. While I was listening to you, I would say that there are two focuses in your research project that might be challenging to be gathered in a single article for the paper that you're going to write for the foundation. So on the one hand, you're doing a sociological analysis through which, if I'm not mistaken, you try to understand through focus group and interviews the awareness of children, minority children, of their rights, so the way they perceive to have rights, and the example you show us is an answer. On the other hand, you look at the relationship between the EU legal framework. I thought at the beginning that it was the European Union, not the Council of Europe, but then you answered to this question, and the Cyprus legal framework. I'm gonna give you some suggestion on the second part, because I'm not a sociologist, and I was actually surprised that you didn't mention, and maybe you can investigate it, the most important recommendation of the EU. It's a recommendation, obviously, because as the chair panelist said, the EU does not have the competencies, and so that's another issue. But by the way, the recommendation of 2013 of the European Commission on investing on children breaking the circle of disadvantage, which is the most important so far recommendation. Oh my God. The most important recommendation by the European Commission to member states on how to invest in children, and there are two specific articles on the rights of minority children, with a specific focus on Roma in this case. But it would be interesting to see from a legal perspective how Cyprus received this recommendation and attempt to implement it, because de facto a recommendation does not have any legal bindingness, but at the same time it's indeed a recommendation. At the same time, just another suggestion, 2016 the European Parliament presented a pilot project on the possibility to create a European child guarantee, which is in this case a budgetary tool to support member states investing in children. Now the pilot project, you know, it's 2 years project. They launched a 2 years consultation with social partners, NGOs, and as you're gonna read the position of NGOs, in April 2019 there has been published the report of these 2 years consultation. So it would be maybe helpful for you to see the results of the consultation with NGOs and Cyprus NGOs, because there is a country case study, so you just take Cyprus in this your case, and you have already maybe a reference framework that might be helpful for you. So my suggestion is that I think the project is really great, and the topic I really like it, so that's why I'm a little bit passionate in talking about that. For the paper, I think it would be better to focus on one of the two, because on the one hand you have a sociological research, on the other hand you have maybe a more legal research into like process tracing, and yeah, but congratulations, because the topic is needed and necessary, so congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I will take into consideration your suggestions, definitely. The process that I followed to present this topic today was from the national level and then to the European level. So having not coming across, I didn't come across the suggestions or the recommendation you said, it means that at the national level, probably we have not, because they are not binding, so probably we have not yet, and it is a new element, the 2013 element. So in Cyprus, we need actually some years. First, all these recommendations, etc., come to the western part or the central part of Europe, and then to the eastern part. So most probably, but definitely I will like do a more in-depth research, and then I will try, and if I don't find it at the national level, and then it's going to be a question why. It's not just to take take for granted that it's not implemented, but at the same time to question why it's not implemented. Or if it is implemented, and then in a different way, because it's not a regulation and it's not binding, then why did we change it in a different way at the Cyprus national level? So yeah, definitely. And on your other comment that I need to focus on the one aspect rather than the two aspects, definitely. Because I thought that we were going to have more time in writing the article, but having realized that it's only a 3-month period, then definitely I will need to focus on either aspect. And then most probably, at the moment, I want to focus on the socio-legal part and phenomenological part, which is more interesting to have the views and opinions of children being involved in the research.
Are there some other questions?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I actually didn't know most of the things you said about Cyprus, so thank you. Well, I have a few questions because it's a very delicate topic, talking about the rights of children. And when we talk about cultural rights, it's even harder to find a consensus on that. Two things. The first one is probably, but I don't know if you can do it, it might be a nice suggestion, is to consider another country in terms of comparison. You don't need to do another case study, but a single case study always bring us problems like endogeneity of a single factor that we don't see anywhere else. Also to have a benchmark, like where cultural rights of citizens and of minorities and then of children are respected well or not. So it's nice to probably have this kind of benchmark. And I would suggest you to consider a country that culture is not so different. The research is going to be quite hard because it's a very peculiar case, but it might help. And the second thing is, when you speak about assimilation, feeling like belongings, I was part of a research team 3 years ago on, it was actually the research of a friend of mine on Israeli-Palestinian communities and the condition of children in schools. And we had a lot to learn from a psychologist. And she said, look, why are you doing a survey to children? Usually in that phase of the development of personality, they suggest to do coping study. So basically how the children can adapt themselves to environmental conditions, to the groups they are belonging or not. So perhaps when you choose between different methodologies, try to have a look to the review also on using or not this kind of information. That's not poor related to social sciences, but actually there are some cases in which they use copying as an example. So if you don't find anything about that, you can also write me. I will try to be useful. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Just to reply, yeah, definitely I had in my mind that I want to compare it, and it actually is not my selection, it's a need to compare. I'm that of that view, that we need every result we have after a research, definitely we need to compare it with other contexts, because we may found similar results or different results, and then again we need to find the reason behind similar or different results if the context is more or less the same. So definitely for this proposed research, it will be impossible to compare, to collect data from another context. But for my PhD thesis, or from a postdoc, or from a project research in general, definitely these results need to be compared to other results as well, when other data, and to have the same indicators, and then with the same indicators to analyze whether we have something in common between the context or in difference, and then again to find the reasoning behind, and to have this part of the content analysis, to have this discourse analysis, and to go behind of what we have found, and to find the explanations why you have found something. The other, I'm gonna like ask back about the age of the children, about the research you told us in Israel-Palestinian context. Were these adolescents, those children involved in the research, adolescents or primary school? In my case, I'm gonna have adolescents because we need, if you interview primary school children, it's too complicated. Primary school children want actually a game. Like to have like a Game Boy or something and to go through it and like give an answer or like say something orally. But if I go to focus group, to do focus groups or interview children, I think they will not be willing and they will not be familiarized with the whole context. So I think in my case, I'm not sure whether I mentioned it, I will involve children aged 12 to 18. So it's adolescents and at the same time young people.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I mean, it's really interesting from my point of view. My question is, which were the variables that you haven't taken into account to build a semi-structured interview to the children?
The interview protocol?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in how I'm going to develop the interview protocol, I'm going to develop a bit with hypothetical scenarios. Not many, like 4 to 5 hypothetical scenarios, small scenarios, to be related to the school context, to the home context, to a social context, like a community club, and then to have some statements where the children can be asked what they think about that statement in relation to the scenario and why they think something about that statement. So at the same time to have a kind of quantitative. So yeah, I'm in favor of that statement in relation to this scenario, but at the same time we need to have this content analysis on the qualitative part. So why do they think that is important? And then at the same time to have a discourse analysis. Is this related to the relation of children with their parents? Is this related in relation to the relation with between children and the state, the authorities, their teachers, the principal of the school? It depends on the context. So if I answer your question, this is the variables, that I'm going to include in the interview protocol. It will not be a big interview protocol, definitely, because we need some quick data and we need to be really specific on what we're actually going to ask.
Thank you very much for your presentation. As Matteo said, you explained things that I think lots of us here weren't aware of. I'm going to show my ignorance totally now. But I think it might be useful for you to see the little awareness that your public may have and maybe adapt. I don't know what a Maronite is, so I wanted to ask you. Sorry.
The Maronites, the Maronite community.
I don't know what they are. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I got. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you did explain it, but it passed me by, and I would like to make you realize that sometimes you're using concepts that not everybody has to know, especially if you're legally minded.
Totally, thank you for mentioning that. I tried to explain the historical and political background of Cyprus. Some minority groups are well known, like the Armenians, the Turkish Cypriots, Greek Cypriots, Latins, Jewish, Roma people. But Maronites is a community that is only found in Cyprus. And is Lebanese Arabs that came to Cyprus in the 7th century, and they have their own dialect. So they speak an Arabic, a mixture of Arabic and Greek Cypriot dialect. No one can understand them, and they cannot communicate with Arabs. So they need to code switch in Arabic language in order to communicate with their people, and then to code switch with us in Greek Cypriot to communicate with us. But in their own community, they speak this Arabic dialect. And my disappointment is that this language is now in a dying position, in a dying process. Yeah, because the new generations are not learning their background, their language, they don't learn the importance. Because culture is not only cultural, anthropologically speaking, is linked to the language, is linked to the religion. So if you don't know your background, your cultural background, then you find no purpose in learning the language of your background. And at the same time, according to the constitution, the main language, the official language of Cyprus is Greek and Turkish. So there is no place for these languages. In my PhD thesis, I touched this part as well. I touched the linguistic part and the religious part. But for this proposed research, for this proposed research, it's going to be too much if I try to touch every single aspect. But it's really important. Definitely, in a further article, in a further contribution, this article that will be submitted to the USE Foundation with an article submitted through my PhD research, it could be a combination for a third article, like to some results from the cultural background to be combined with the linguistic and religious background, and we probably find another explanation behind this story.
Do you know how many there are in the world? So there are only in Cyprus.
Not only Cyprus. Have you seen the table? That if I can go back to that table, there are no many. Totally. Yeah, I can go back. Yeah, I don't remember by heart the numbers. I remember the total number, that's 653 children. Oops.
So you have the number of the children, but not actually the community.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Are there in Lebanon as well?
No. Only in Cyprus. The Maronite community and only in Cyprus. They travel to Lebanon to study. So I'm not sure whether they have created a community there, as the Greek Cypriots have created a community in Australia, let's say, or in Great Britain. But their origins actually and their language their origins actually are in Cyprus. Oops. Here it is. So we have in total 230 children that are registered in the Cyprus District Administration Office. Some of them, and this is a problem in Cyprus, do not decide to mention their background. They decide to be assimilated with the majority group. And that's a shame, in my opinion. Because now it's 2019, and we have these results. Probably in 2025, we may have like 300 children. In 2030, we may have 200 children. And in 20 years from now, we may have no children. Because no one will know that they have this background. So, yeah. And this is not only for Cyprus. I'm not sure from the Spanish context, but most probably, we may have similar situations in other European countries. So Cyprus is just a case study. So Cyprus will give the floor to other countries to explore the minorities, and especially children from minorities. In Greece, probably, with the POMAX, we have a same situation, which are Turkish origin, but at the same time, they are Muslims, and at the same time, they don't want to be POMAX. They want to deny their background, their cultural background, their religious background, their linguistic background. And they want to be assimilated, actually, within the Greek state. Integration, in my opinion, is really useful, but having the diversity at the same time. We need to be integrated, but have a self-respect and respect for each other, so between us and among us.
I think there's time for one last question. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think that this is a very interesting research. It is definitely not easy to find this balance between unity and diversity. And this is definitely a challenge that all I think that most of the EU member states are also facing, but from different perspectives, maybe also the religious perspective and the linguistic perspective as well. I look forward to hearing more about it in the future and to keep exchanging on this topic with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.